when the Roman army decided to go conquer Britain, because they pretty much conquered everywhere else at that point, within spitting distance, and then some, Boudica basically gathered together an army of tens of thousands of Celtic warriors and went, yeah, we like it here without you guys. No? Fine, let's fight. She actually gathered together an army and withstood the might of Rome for quite some time. Ultimately, she was unsuccessful, and there was, in fact, a 4.5-inch layer of ash underneath the modern-day city of London that is all that was left of Londinium, the Roman town, when she was done with it. She was an example of a Celtic woman who had no qualms about picking up a sword and going into battle with her man, or without her man, or without any men, or with a bunch of women. And I was fascinated by that kind of character, and when I was a kid I was reading a lot of, again, I really had no friends. I got into archaeology, like all this history stuff, and I was like, I could be occupied with 2 unsharpened pencils for hours by myself in a room with a book. And I read a lot about just all of these archaeological finds and the occasional very random reference to gladiators that were not hefty dudes that looked like Russell Crowe. And just these really random, tantalizing bits and pieces of pottery or fragments from histories that would pop up alluding to female gladiators. There wasn't a lot of information. Over the years, as I grew older, things started to pop up, like there's a sculpture of 2 figures which are clearly women holding heavy shields, wearing tons of armor with swords, called Amazona and Aquilia, and they're like, oh, well, female gladiators, but the scholarly opinion was like, that wasn't really a thing. Clearly, they're just an anomaly. And I'm like, well, why would they be? And that's turning away in my head. And then there was a particular excavation done in Britain called the Great Dover Street Woman, wherein they excavated a grave. You heard a bunch of this today. Yeah. But they excavated a grave. They found a bunch of grave goods that pointed directly to the fact that this occupant of this grave was clearly a gladiator. And then they examined the actual remains of said occupant and went, oh no, it's a chick. Well, clearly not a gladiator then. The lover of a gladiator or the wife of a gladiator. And I'm like, why not a gladiator? She gladiator. And scholarly opinion has kind of started to turn in that direction because more women are getting into this kind of thing and bringing the female gaze towards that aspect of it. And I remember when I was 12 years old, even, there was a bronze statue that I saw in a book that I kept coming back to that was a woman who was topless, sort of, so they called her the bather. Because clearly she's bathing because she's a woman, except she's holding an implement which they called a bathing implement. It's a long curved thing that she's holding in her hand, and they're like, well, it's a bathing scraper, except she's holding it like this. And my point, and you guys have heard this over and over again, but who bathes triumphantly?
Wash bath bombs all the way.
Renee's like, I don't know, sometimes, yeah. I'm clean.
All the time.
Yeah, like she's not even doing a pit check. She's not like this. She's like this. But you can't see what she's looking at because that half of the statue is gone. And I'm like, she's not bathing. She's clearly a warrior who's just ended somebody. But no, they called her the bather. And now they're actually, I think, calling her the female gladiator. Yeah, I know, right? It's like, it's progress. So that is actually where the inspiration, long story short, that is where the inspiration of the book came from. And I just imagined, and I knew that through the things that I've read, that Julius Caesar in particular was nuts for gladiators. He had stables of them. And gladiators back then weren't just entertainment for the masses. They were actually a political tool. They were a status symbol, and they were, this was not long after the Spartacan rebellion had happened. And Julius Caesar would have been a young man actually fighting against Spartacus, and so a lot of that kind of weaves its way into the tale. So it's political, and it's dramatic, and there's slaves and stuff, and maybe a sexy gladiator boyfriend who happens to be a Roman soldier.